So I had not been paying much attention to the quote walk away movement. You're all familiar with hashtag walk away. So I read a little bit about the thinking behind it, and I was wondering, what policy is it in particular? Is it because, my assumption, which was incorrect, my assumption was that maybe it's policy related, or maybe it's they just prefer the Republican policies after all, or maybe they're just seeing that the president is being effective in a general way. That's what I thought before I read the details. Oh my viewers, this is way more interesting than that. I don't know if you quite caught it, but let me put it in context I like to talk about the most. You know how I talk about the persuasion filter? It's a way of looking at the world as if everything is persuasion and the facts and reason are things we pretend we care about but sort of don't. And I've also said that President Trump, and I said this, 2 years ago, would, quote, punch a hole in the universe or put a tear in the universe so that you could look through the hole and see reality for the first time, because we all walk around in this little bubble movie of our own making. And I said that he's going to let you see reality, at least a little bit of it, not all of it, because we're not able. But he would put a hole in your current bubble so you could just peek out and see what's on the other side, and you'd say, holy cap, I'm in a bubble. So really the most you're going to get out of this is the knowledge certain that you've been living in a bubble of truth that you created in your own head as opposed to truth that exists in the universe. And apparently that's what happened to Brendan Straka, because here's how he describes his thinking behind the walkaway. It wasn't about policy. Here's what it was about. He realized that the Democrats were using fear to manipulate people. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. That's peeking through the hole in the universe. It wasn't about policies. It wasn't about, which leader is a little more effective. It wasn't about who cares about you. It wasn't about who's got the best plans for the future. He realized that one side was manipulating them with fear. And that's all that was going on. Well, that's not all that's going on, but that was the big picture. The big picture was persuasion that was fear-based, and the fear wasn't real. Now you're saying to yourself, Trump uses fear to manipulate you too. Here's the difference. The fear that Trump uses, and he does use fear to manipulate, he's talking about fear of people outside the country, in many cases who have actually killed lots of people, like ISIS and terrorists. So when he's tough on the border, he's pointing to MS-13, who are real people. MS-13 actually kills people. And apparently we're only just learning that although immigrants as a group have an unusually low crime rate, yay immigrants, I'm very pro-immigrant, low crime rate, great addition to the country. But among the class of illegal ones who are breaking the law to get in, it turns out that the rate of murder and violent crime and stuff is far higher than their percentage in the population. So they are literally a high crime group, just the illegals. Immigrants in general, awesome people contributing to the country, lower crime than normal, lower crime than average. So Trump's fear is based on people who really exist and really are hurting people. Those are things you actually should be worried about. Trump's fear would be, you could argue that he scared everybody with North Korea, But that's a real fear, and he got a pretty good result there, or at least it seems to head in the right direction. So, but if you look at the Democrats' version of fear. Their fear is of your fellow citizen. Is that a sexist term? Can you say that anymore? Can you say your fellow citizen? Is that sexist? What's the generic way to say that? Your other citizens, your teammates, your country people? Comrade citizens, somebody says. So notice the huge difference there. So Brendan Straka has realized that the Democrats are creating fear of each other. Trump is creating fear almost entirely, I can't think of an example, of people who are outside our borders who are literally armed and dangerous. People with actual guns and weapons who are actually using them. That's a little bit different, right? There's one thing you should be afraid of, and there's one thing that's largely invented. And enough time has now passed so that any reasonable citizen can see that the things that people said about Trump were clearly untrue. There was a fear that he would tank the economy. Not true. There was a fear that he would blow up the world with nuclear weapons and never get anywhere with North Korea because he's a crazy man. He's crazier than Kim Jong-un. Not true. And you know what? It wasn't even true that Kim Jong-un is crazy in any way that matters for negotiating. What else? Oh, there was a fear that he would round up gay people and, put them in camps. Obviously not true. There was a fear that, he would do this or that. Anyway, so it's becoming more and more clear to the people on the left that they've been taken by their own side. That their own side is using fear of their own country people. I don't want to say countrymen. You realize how sexist all of our old terms are. But that is a powerful, it's a very powerful thought. And if this walk-away thing had been, based on, I think I've changed my mind and I like the Republican policies better, I'd say to myself, that's not much. A few people change parties because of policies, no big deal. But when people are talking about changing parties because they realize that they're being taken, that they're just being taken, manipulated by fear, and that let me put this in perspective. Imagine, if you will, that all of the coverage of this president had been just straight objective coverage, that nobody ever gave an opinion of what they thought he would do or what they thought he was thinking. What if the only coverage you'd seen had been coverage of Trump as a person who does stuff, and you just observe what he does, compare it to maybe what he promised, and say, yeah, he's doing the things that he got elected for, etc. Here's what people think of it. Here's what they don't. But if the news had not become, let's say, participants in the political process, had they not moved from an observer watchdog role to actual participants trying to move the needle, would the left be afraid of this president? A little, maybe, just because, it's a big country and there are a lot of different opinions and a lot of different individuals, but probably nothing like we're seeing. I would argue that close to 100% of the fear that people have about this president is based on, non-objective coverage. Would you say that's true? Would you agree with me that almost 100% of the fear, I'm talking about the irrational fear, the thing that makes people vomit and shake, because that's what people are experiencing. right? Joke all you will about, the left, howling at the moon and stuff like that. But this is a real medical problem. They've lived for 18 months in total fear. Where's that fear coming from? Well, they've been manipulated into believing it's coming from the president. That it's because of the things he's doing, the things he's thinking, which is crazy, because they don't know what he thinks, and the things that in their imagination he might do. Those things all come from the press, and the opinion part of the press, mostly. That's not coming from the president. What has the president said recently that would scare a citizen of the United States? Now, I do think there's a role of the press, and that public opinion and everything has changed this president's policy preferences. So, for example, when he was campaigning, he was talking about deporting 14 million people who are here undocumented but otherwise good citizens. And, of course, he's not doing that. And it doesn't look like there's any real chance of that happening. So there's some big things that we see the public pretty much immediately cause this president to change opinions. Take the children in cages, for example. The public had its say, and it looked like public had his say, and he changed. Now, somebody's saying, what about the repeal of Roe versus Wade? I'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, so my point is that this Brandon Straka, what he's doing is far more important than I imagined when I was just reading the headline about it, and I didn't read the detail. Once you see his reason, that he realized the Democrats are manipulating people into this permanent unhealthy, very, very physically and mentally unhealthy, have I mentioned unhealthy state. So the Democrats, for their political benefit, have caused the entire left to be in physical and mental distress for 2 years. Policy schmolicy. Does policy matter to you if you realize that your own team has made you deeply unhealthy for 2 years intentionally for their own gain? Let me ask you this. If you want to get mad, you probably won't get as mad the people who are watching this Periscope. But if you're on the left, let me ask you this. Do you believe that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are as afraid for the future as they have made you feel? Let that just hang there for a minute. If you're a Democrat, do you think that Schumer and Pelosi are as afraid about what might happen with this president, with the country, as they have made you, the voter, feel? Not a chance. Not even a slight chance. And you know what? You could tell. You could tell just by looking at them. Have you ever seen an actual anti-Trumper, like a citizen, just a regular citizen who has fear of the future for the country because of the president? Have you watched them? This is no joke. Their fear is physical. They are physically shaking. You can see it in their eyes. There is a deep, real fear. Who put that there? Their own people, their own leaders. Do those leaders share that fear? Not a chance.